Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into something pretty complex, the drugs that work on our central nervous system. We're going to talk about how these medications can tweak our brain chemistry to affect everything from our mood to our ability to focus.
So let's start with the big question, right? You've probably wondered this yourself. How do medicines for things like depression, anxiety, or ADHD actually do what they do inside our brains? It's a great question, and to answer it, we've got to get into the nitty-gritty of how the brain talks to itself.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll cover the basics, the brain's chemical messengers. Then we'll jump into the big ones, SSRIs and SNRIs. After that, we'll look at some other antidepressants, drugs for anxiety and seizures, and finally, we'll touch on stimulants and cognitive enhancers.
All right, first things first, let's talk about the brain's chemical messengers. You really can't understand how these drugs work unless you get this fundamental piece of the puzzle. It all boils down to how our brain cells communicate.
And that brings us to this key term, neurotransmitter. I mean, what is it? Think of them like tiny chemical messengers, like little couriers, zipping between your brain cells. They're carrying signals that influence, well, everything, your mood, your sleep, your focus. And pretty much every single drug we're talking about today works by messing with these messengers in some way, either turning their volume up or down.
Okay, now that we've got the basics, let's dive into probably the most well-known group of antidepressants, SSRIs and SNRIs. The names might be a mouthful, but the way they work is actually pretty clever.
So here's the deal with both of these. Imagine a neurotransmitter delivers its message. Normally, the brain cell that sent it just sucks it back up to be reused later. That's called reuptake. Well, what these drugs do is block that process. They stop the recycling. This means more of that chemical messenger gets to hang around and keep the signal going. The difference is in what they target. SSRIs are super specific. They only focus on serotonin. Think of them like a sniper. SNRIs, on the other hand, are a bit broader. They go after both serotonin and another one called norepinephrine.
And yeah, you've probably heard of some of these, right? Citalopram, fluoxetine, sertraline. Seeing them on this list really helps connect the dots. When you hear those names, you can now think, right, those are the SSRIs, the ones that focus just on serotonin.
But, it's not all about SSRIs and SNRIs. The brain is complicated and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So let's look at some of the other types of antidepressants out there.
So, before we had these really targeted SSRIs, one of the main players was a class called Tricyclic Antidepressants, or TCAs. They kind of do what SNRIs do. They boost both serotonin and norepinephrine. But because they're an older type of drug, they're a bit, less precise. They can have more side effects, which is why doctors usually don't reach for them first these days. And a couple of examples you might see are amitriptyline and mirtazapine. So yeah, even though they're not the go-to choice anymore, they are still really important options in a doctor's toolbox.
Okay, and then you have this other group called atypical antidepressants. And honestly, atypical is the perfect word. It's kind of like a catch-all category for drugs that just don't fit neatly into the other boxes. They don't play by the usual SSRI or SNRI rules. They might go after a totally different neurotransmitter, like dopamine, or just have a completely unique way of working.
Bupropion and trazodone are two great examples, and because they're so different, they can be a real game changer for people who haven't had much luck with the more common types of antidepressants.
All right, let's switch gears a bit, because the brain's chemistry isn't just about depression. It's also at the center of things like anxiety, how excitable the brain is, and even preventing seizures.
When it comes to treating severe anxiety, especially in the short term, you'll often hear about a class of drugs called benzodiazepines. These are powerful sedatives. Their job is basically to tell the central nervous system to just calm down. They turn down the overall volume in the brain, which is why they work so fast.
And this is a really, really important point. Because they work so well and so quickly, they come with a major warning. These drugs have a high potential for addiction and dependence. That's why they have to be used with extreme caution and always under the close supervision of a doctor.
Next up, we have anticonvulsants. As the name suggests, these are all about controlling the brain's electrical signals. Their main job is to stop the kind of chaotic electrical storms in the brain that cause seizures.
But what's really fascinating about anticonvulsants is how versatile they are. It turns out that the same thing that helps stabilize the brain's electrical activity for seizures can also help level out moods in bipolar disorder, or it can quiet down the scrambled signals that cause nerve pain. It's a perfect example of how interconnected everything is up there.
Okay, we've talked a lot about calming the brain down. Now let's flip the script and talk about drugs designed to do the opposite, to ramp things up and boost focus, attention, and even memory.
4. That's the number. Our source material points to 4 main central nervous system stimulants that are used to treat ADHD. So, what are they?
Here's the list. All of these work by boosting the levels of those key neurotransmitters that are in charge of attention and focus. For someone with ADHD, this can make a world of difference in their ability to concentrate.
Now, when we talk about something like Alzheimer's disease, the whole strategy changes. It's less about boosting a signal and more about protecting what's already there. That's where something like a cholinesterase inhibitor comes in. You can think of it as a bodyguard for a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is super important for memory. This drug's job is to block the enzyme that tries to break acetylcholine down.
And there's another approach that takes a totally different tack. Instead of protecting the messenger, this one focuses on the receiver, the docking station on the brain cell. These are called NMDA inhibitors. By managing the activity at that receptor site, they can help control the symptoms of Alzheimer's. It's a completely different way to tackle the problem.
So to wrap it all up, this table gives us a great bird's eye view. You can see the conditions we talked about: depression, anxiety, ADHD, and right next to them, the main classes of drugs used to treat them. It's a nice, clean way to see how everything connects.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. As we get better and better at understanding the brain's incredibly complex chemistry, you have to wonder, how are these treatments going to evolve? What we've looked at today is amazing, but it's really just a snapshot in time. The science is moving so fast, and what comes next? Well, that's the truly exciting part.